This coat block is perfect for coats and jackets that are designed to go over lightweight clothes. I'm Ali and I have been dressmaking since the early 90s, both for myself and professionally, and I absolutely love making coats. But number one for making a perfect coat is getting it to fit right. So I always listen to feedback and questions on my videos, and I thought it was about time I remade my coat tutorial that I made a while ago, where I go into a little bit more detail along the way where people have asked questions. So this coat block is similar to a bodice block if you have done that, but it's obviously designed to go over your clothes. It's got a slightly lower armhole. I've not put waist shaping in this, but I do show you where to put it when you need to do that. And the fit is just slightly different. There's a lot more ease in it because it's obviously designed to go over your clothes. So I go through it step by step, every single thing you need to know, from taking the measurements through to drawing all the lines on your paper to get the size absolutely perfect, how to do the curves for the armhole, things like that, and then of course how to just make the sample up and how to fit it. The sleeve is covered in a different tutorial. If you are watching this as soon as I've posted it, then it won't be up yet, but it will be up in a few days. If you're watching this further down the line, then there is a link above and in the description to my 2-sleeve tutorial, which is what I have here. I didn't think it made much sense to show this without a sleeve, which I did in my previous tutorial. It helps to see how it fits with the sleeve on. So I am gonna go through how to do this 2-piece sleeve in a separate tutorial. You can also do a 1-piece sleeve, and I have put the link in the description to that. So as I said, this is designed to go over clothes. It's not designed to go over really bulky clothes, but I have got a cardigan under this, and it's important that when you take your measurements to make it, you measure it over the kind of clothes you're going to wear. So it's just got this one dart at the top. Now obviously when you're making your coat, when you're designing it, you can put that dart wherever you want. You can move it around. I have videos on how to move darts around, but the reason it's going up like this is because I think it's just much easier to draft your block with it in this position. This is how I learned many years ago at college, and it's how I've done it ever since. I've looked at other ways of drafting patterns, but I really think this is the easiest way to do it. Now it's hard to give a calculation to work out that dart. I have tried previously, but it doesn't work for everyone. So what I'm doing is I am just giving you a list of measurements, which is a bit of a standard, which I don't like to do, but this is a really tricky one. What you're basically doing is you're taking the fullness at the bust and reducing it down to the shoulder. So it's a tricky one to do, but if you work with these standard sizes, it's not going to be far off, and then you can tweak it when you come to fit your sample. So my coat block here has 10 centimetres of ease. So what I've done is I've measured around my bust. That's where I do all of the measurements from. I will take into account the hips as well. If you're pear-shaped like me, you're going to need it to go a bit wider down there. But what I've done is I've measured with my cardigan on, so it's not going to be too tight, and then I've added 10 centimetres of ease on top of that. So that is what I would advise to do. You don't need to add as much as this if you want something a little bit closer fitting, but I wouldn't go too tight. And you could add a little bit more than 10 centimetres if you want, but you don't want to add too much because you're going to end up with a armhole here that goes quite wide, and it's just not going to fit perfectly. When you're adding that much ease in, you kind of need to add it throughout, not just at the side here. So 10 centimetres is a good place to start for the block. So as I said, it is very similar to the fitted bodice block tutorial. You could adapt that block if you want to, but I always think it's easier and quicker just to draft up this block rather than trying to amend an existing bodice block that you've drafted up. So I don't think I need to say any more. It's self-explanatory. This is a coat block. You're going to make your designs from it. You're not going to make a coat that looks like this. The neck here is where you would join your collar on, and you can put whatever sleeve in you want, and it's just the basic shape. I've not got waist shaping, as I said, but I will show you while I'm drafting the pattern where to put the lines ready to put waist shaping if you want it. So I am going to get straight on now and show you how to take the measurements for drafting this block. So there's quite a few measurements for this, but it won't take you long to do. Now, you might already have measurements for a lot of these things, but I really would advise, if you've only done your measurements wearing something really lightweight in the past, put on something that you're likely to wear under this coat. Now, I'm not going to go out in the winter in a coat with just a t-shirt underneath, so I don't want to measure myself like that, which is why I've put a cardigan on. This is standard kind of thing that I wear under my coat when I go out. You want to measure over this just in case it adds any bulk. It's not going to make a massive difference, but it takes seconds just to put something on, so I'd recommend doing that. So let's just work through these measurements one at a time. If you see my eyes keep going down, it's because I've got a list, because I want to make sure I don't forget any of these. So apologies by my eyes drifting across. So you want to measure your bust at the fullest part, You don't want to measure this tight. Now I'm adding in 10 centimetres of ease in this, but I'm also making sure I don't measure it too tight, and of course I'm measuring it over this cardigan. It's not going to make a huge difference, but it's worth doing. So that is the bust at the fullest point. And you also want to measure your hips. And what I am doing for this, I hate it when I have a coat and it's a bit tight on the hips, because I've got wide hips anyway. Everything's tight on my hips. But what I'm doing is I'm actually putting the tape measure exactly how I want it to fit. Because if I just think, oh, I want to add this much ease in, that much ease, I don't know if it's going to be right. And the other thing I would do is I would sit down in this. I don't have a chair to hand to do it if I lift my leg up. But when you kind of go like this, obviously it makes it that little bit tighter. So make sure you've got plenty of room. There is nothing more frustrating with a coat than having to undo that bottom button every single time you sit down. And now I'm gonna just tie this around my waist because we need to do a few measurements that go from the waist. So let's just put this on. So if you've got a bit of elastic, like me, just do that, or just find anything that you've got. It's kind of exactly the same place as my cardigan, isn't it? Let's see if I can pull that down a bit and then put that in place. So I'm not looking in a mirror, so if I hold the tape measure in slightly the wrong place, then apologies. So you need to measure from your waist to the fullest part of your bust, and that just shows you basically where you're going to be putting the dart on the block. You also need to measure to the armhole, so this is where the armhole is going to be, but when I draft the pattern I do lower it a bit because you want that little bit more room in it. So just kind of measure it to where your it's a hard thing to say, kind of where your arm joins your body. That sounds odd, doesn't it? But where you'd imagine the armhole to be on the top, and then we're going to lower it to give you that bit more room. And then you want to measure from your waist to your hip. So I'm not putting waist shaping in this, but we do mark the waistline, so it's there if you want to add shaping later on when making a pattern. And we need the hip line just for the bottom of the block. So just measure from the elastic down to the widest bit of your hip. And then while you've got this elastic on, this is the more tricky one, and you might have seen this on my other videos. So there are various ways of measuring vertically from your waist up to your neck and your shoulder, but I just find this is the best way to get a block accurate. And as I said, I don't have a mirror, so I am literally just doing this and hoping for the best that you can see it. So where the elastic is at the back, you want to be putting your tape measure on that, and then you want it to go over your shoulder at this point here to the side of your neck. You want it to go over the bust point, and then you want it to go to the elastic at the front. I think mine's moved. Hard to do when you can't see. And my shoulder's up like this because I'm having to hold it, but you need to kind of relax your shoulder. If you've got someone to help you, it's certainly going to help. You could even, if you've got a tape measure that's got a little hole in the end, you could pin it to yourself. But you want to take that measurement from the waist at the back up to your shoulder, and you want to look in the mirror and get the measurement that it is at that point. And then you want it to continue over the bust and take that total. So the measurement you take from here up to your shoulder is your back neck to waist measurement, and then the total that you get at the waist here, subtract that first measurement, and that gives you the front measurement. The reason I do it all in one go is because you know then that the back and the front, the total is exactly right, because when you put your sample on, if you've done these separately, it could go a little bit off. Whereas doing them together, once you get your sample on, it just means that the total of your back and front is correct. The position might just be slightly in the wrong place, in which case you can just adjust your shoulder forwards or backwards. I've just found that that works to get it absolutely perfect, particularly if you're big busted and your front is a lot bigger than your back. It's just a good way of doing it. So I'm done with my bit of elastic now, so let's take that off, and we've only got a few more to do. So I don't measure the shoulder slope. It's a really tricky one to do, and I'll show you how to calculate that when you do it. And for the neck, I will show you a calculation to work it out. So you just need a neck measurement. You're not measuring around your neck like this, you're measuring the bottom of it. So basically where the opening would be on a coat. Now my cardigan's got a much bigger opening than what my coat will have, but you want to kind of measure around here. If you look at the beginning of the video where I had the block on, you'll see exactly where it is, and that's where you want to measure it. So mine measures 37 centimetres. I think that is fairly average. Yours might be a little bit bigger or smaller, but it's not going to be a million miles off from 37. You then need to measure from where you've measured that neck, you need to measure down to where you want the seam to be, where your sleeve goes on. So I am very, very small shouldered. Mine only measures from here to where I want the seam, 13 centimetres. Don't be alarmed if yours is quite a bit more than that, because I am really narrow across here. And then lastly, you want to measure a few measurements across to make sure your dart's in the right position and your armhole is the right width. So you need to measure point to point on the bust. So basically nipple to nipple, you just need to take that measurement across. you need to measure, this is called the chest, from basically where that seam is going to be. You need to measure across here. Now again, I'm very narrow across here. Mine is only 33, yours is likely to be bigger, but it's going to be kind of around that number or a few centimetres bigger than that, but it's basically where that armhole goes. So if I get my pattern piece, it's this measurement across here. And if you go too small, your armhole's going to be really cut out. If you go too wide, it's going to sit out here and it means your sleeve wouldn't fit on it properly. You can adjust that on your body nice and easily, but try and get it as near as you can. And so that is for the front, and then we've got exactly the same measurement on the back. You might find it hard to do unless you are double jointed, but you need to kind of measure across here like this. Now it's going to be quite hard to do that accurately if you're doing it yourself. If you've got someone to do it, then just get them to measure across your back. If you haven't, a general rule I use is just to add 2 centimetres onto that front measurement. It's not going to be 100% accurate, but if you can't get your arms around there and you don't have anyone to help and you want to get drafting, just do that and then you can adjust it on your pattern when you try it on. Okay, so that is all the measurements we need to take. The only other measurement that I use when drafting is the dart. I've tried various ways of calculating this, but it's just too tricky. So what I have started doing now is just including a chart of sizes, and it's in the description as well, of the dart width that you need to go with your bust size. It's a very kind of standard way of doing it, and standard is not something that I like to do, but for the dart, I think it's the best way to make sure everyone gets a good dart size to make their pattern. So either pause it on this chart or just take a look in the description when you get to the end, and it's got all of those measurements. Just find the nearest one to your size, and if you're in between, you'll be able just to adjust those sizes accordingly. So that is the dart, and then there's a few calculations along the way when we're working out the neck, the shoulder slope, things like that, but I go through them in a lot of detail, and don't worry, I put everything on screen with words so you can see it in case I say something too quickly or you don't quite hear it. I've listened to feedback that people like seeing that on screen, so I put all of those details on for you to see. Okay, so that's everything you need to know now to get started. You've seen what you're making, you've seen the pattern, you've got all your measurements. Just make sure that your piece of paper is big enough. You need the width of it to be half of your bust measurement plus a little bit, and you need the length of it to be long enough to go from your neck down to your hip plus a little bit either side. So let's stop talking and get straight on with making that pattern, and best of luck when you are making your own. The shape of the block we're making is kind of long, so I would be able to get it on screen a lot better if I was to do it with the shoulders here and the hem here and draw it this way. But I think it's a lot easier to understand like this. So I'll concentrate on the top, and I will zoom in a little bit so you can see that better. And then I'll have to just move this around a little bit to show the bottom. But I think it's a lot easier to understand if you see it from this angle. And it's a lot easier for you to draft at this angle as well. It just makes more sense, I think. So to start with, I've got a line going across the top, and I'm going to call this the shoulder line. And then this line going down here is my centre back. So that's what you need to get started. And then the first measurement I'm going to do is the total body width. So going from the centre back to the centre front. So what you need to do is you need to take your bust measurement and add some ease. So you could have added the ease when you were measuring around yourself with a loose tape measure, or you might have taken an exact measurement and then added the ease onto that. So I'm adding 10 centimetres of ease into mine, which is around 4 inches. And I'm going to take that measurement and I'm just going to simply divide it by 2. So just make sure you do have that ease added in before you do this, or you're going to have a very, very tight coat to wear. So all I'm going to do is measure from my centre back over here to where my centre front is going to be. And I'm just going to do that in a couple of places. And then I can draw my line going down the centre front. And that is then my total body width at the bust point with plenty of ease in it. So now that I've got that width, I need to draw some horizontal lines in to mark my armhole position, my waist position, and my hip position. So I've turned it around for a minute just so I can put in the new lines, because you're going to see it a lot better like this. So we need to mark in the armhole line, the waistline, and the hip line. So let's just do those one at a time. So the first line I'm going to do is my waist, and I'm going to take the body measurement where I went from my neck to my waist on the back, and I'm just adding on 0.5 centimetre for ease. If not, you're not going to have any ease in this vertically at all. So I had a measurement of 45 centimetres, so I'm just measuring 45.5 here, and I'm going to do it again in another spot. So I can draw that across, and that is my waist position. The next line I'm going to do is the armhole line. So what I need to do is I need to take my measurement that I measured on my body from my waist to where my armhole is, and then I'm taking 1 centimetre off that because I don't want a really tight fitting armhole. You don't have to do this, but generally if you're wearing something over something with long sleeves like this, it's ideal to drop the armhole a little bit. So the measurement on my body was 21, so I'm just taking 1 off and measuring 20 centimetres up from this line. And then I can just do exactly the same and draw across that. And that's the armhole line in position. And then nice and easy again is my waist to hip measurement, which I'm going to just add on 0.5 centimetre of ease. So I'm going to take my body measurement of 22 and add half on. So 22.5 is what I'm measuring there. And then I'm just going to square that across as well. So that's all of those positions in now. So we've got the shoulder, the armhole, the waist and the hip. So I'm just going to turn it around like this because the detail is all at the top like that. So I've zoomed in now so we can concentrate on all of the bits at the top and you can see a lot better. So I need to draw in my neck, my shoulders and the armhole. So we're going to just do a bit at a time. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the back width measurement that I took, which for me is 35, and I'm going to add in 3 centimetres of ease because I want plenty of room around the back for when I'm moving my arms around. So let's do this on the calculator to make it nice and easy. I've got my back width and I'm adding on 3 centimetres of ease, and that is across the total back. And then I'm just going to divide that answer by 2, which gives me 19. So I'm gonna just mark there. I'll do it in a couple of places to make sure it's definitely square. And I'm just gonna draw a line down here. Now, I wouldn't recommend drawing this line too heavy, but I want to make sure that you see it, which is why I am drawing a little bit heavier for this. But just draw that lightly because you might want to rub that out once you do your finished pattern. And then I'm going to do exactly the same on the front. So this time I'm going to take my chest measurement and I'm going to add on my dart width. And with that answer, I'm then going to divide it by 2, and that gives me the same line on the front, which is basically the edge of my armhole. So again, just measure that in a couple of places, and then I'm going to draw the line again a little bit darker than what I normally would. So that is both sides of my armhole now drawn in. Now that I've done that, I can find the midpoint of this, and this indicates where my side seam is. So I've got 14.5 centimetres, so half of that is 7.25, and I am just marking that, and then what I'm going to do is measure it from the centre back there. So it's 26.3. If I measure that in a couple of places, I can now continue that down all the way to the bottom, and that is my side seam position done. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work out where the bust point needs to go. So I'm going to take my point to point measurement and add on 0.5 centimetre and then divide the answer by 2, and that gives me 9.5, and that's what I'm going to measure here from the centre front. And I'm just going to draw a line going down. Again, don't press too hard for this line. And then for the bust point position, I need to again take the measurement I took on my body, and as I've added some ease in vertically here, I need to add a little bit of ease in here. So I'm going to add in half the amount of ease that I've added in total. So I'm adding in 0.25 centimetres, and 18.75 is what I need to measure up from the waist. And I need to measure it to work with this line here, and that there marks where my bust point goes. So before I can draw in my neck and my dart and start doing the shoulder, what I need to do is I need to look at this shoulder line on the front. So for me, my measurements differed by 2 centimetres. My front neck to waist measurement is 2 centimetres longer than my back. So what I need to do, and this is quite often the case, that for a female it's going to be longer at the front than the back. And I'm just drawing that up 2 centimetres here. And then what I'm going to do to avoid confusion is just rub this line out. So if your measurements are exactly the same, you don't need to do anything here. And if your front measurement is smaller than your back, also just leave it where it is. But if your front is longer than your back, then the difference is how much you need to move this line upwards. So I'm now ready to draw my neck in. I can draw in my front and my back neck. Now the easiest bit is on the back. It's just a standard measurement because it's such a small measurement that you're going to be moving this by millimetres depending on size. So 2 centimetres is what you need to measure down from this corner here down, and that is the drop on the back neck. And then for the other 3, so what we're going to do for these measurements is we're going to take the neck measurement and divide it by 5. I don't know how well you can see it on the calculator, so I'm just going to write it here so you can see it. So 7.4 is my neck measurement divided by 5. And then I'm going to draw in all of these positions, but they still need a tiny bit of adjustment because obviously our neck isn't exactly round. So on the back, I'm going to add 0.5 centimetre onto that. So 7.9 is what I'm measuring there. And then on the front, I'm going to add on 3 millimetres. So it is, if I just continue that up there, so it's 7.7 centimetres on the front. And on the neck drop, I'm going to drop that down by 0.5 centimetre more than this, and that makes 7.9. But obviously, when you try your sample on, you can adjust this, because unless you've got an exactly perfect measurement to start with, this could be off slightly anyway, but it's a really easy thing to adjust. So all I'm going to do now, and I'm just doing it by eye, is just draw in the neck shapes for these. So just make sure you don't go down to a point, and the same on the front. You want this to be a right angle to the centre front line, and you want this to go straight up where it hits the shoulder line. The next thing I'm going to do is my dart. So you just need to take your dart measurement. So have a look in the description if you need to work it out. Just find the one nearest to your bust size. And I'm just measuring across here from the, I need to get my hands out of the way, from the side of the neck here, straight across on that line. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to join this point here to my bust point. And I'm going to do the same on this side, and then I need to adjust the length of the one that I'm now doing to measure the same in length as this one. So measure from that shoulder line to the point. So for me, I've got 28.6. And I just need to make sure this one is exactly the same. So depending on your proportions, it could need a little bit of adjustment, it might not need any, and actually mine's coming down a reasonable amount because you need to make sure when that's sewn up that they meet. So for this block, I'm not actually putting any waist shaping in it because a lot of the time for coats, you don't want it shaped at the waist. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue this line down here to the waist position, and then down to the hip position, just so we have a note of it, because this is the position where we would add a bit of waist shaping if we wanted to. And then on the back, all you need to do is measure this back width and find the midpoint, and that is where you would put some shaping on the back if you were having something a little bit more fitted. So I'm just going to continue that down to the hip, and then if I use this block and I want more waist shaping, I know where to put it. The other thing you can do if it's a tailored jacket is you can shape it on that back as well, and you just put a seam in the back. That's quite a normal thing to do. So the next thing I'm going to do is I want to find the point on here where I'm going to draw my armhole around. So I need a midpoint. So all I'm going to do is take the measurement from where my back neck drop is down to this line here. So I've got 23.5, and I'm just going to divide that by 2. So it gives me 11.75. And on this line here, I'm just going to measure upwards and just mark a point. And you'll see what I'm going to use that for in a minute. And then the shape of the armhole is a little bit different at the front, so we need that a bit lower. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure from the neck drop on the front down to this line. So for me, that's 19.2. and divide it by 3, and that gives me 6.4, and that's what I measure up from this line here. So when I draw the armhole shape in, this is what I'm going to use as a guide. So when I draw this armhole shape in, my points need to go through these lines, and you'll see the shape of that in a second. So the next thing I need to do is work out my shoulder slope. It's a really hard measurement to do on the body, but it's also a really hard one to come up with a calculation that is going to work for everyone. So this might need a little bit of adjusting when you put your sample on, but this is a good start. So I am measuring from the neck point here down to this armhole line, and I'm going to divide that by 4. And then this answer here, I'm just going to subtract 2. So that gives me 3.875. So we'll go with 3.9. That is near enough. And I'm measuring down from the top, just measuring a couple of places. And I'm just going to draw a little line across there. So when I measured my shoulder on my body, I measured 13 centimetres from the neck to where I want the seam. So I'm going to draw 13 centimetres from this point here to where 13 centimetres meets this line. So just make sure you've got your ruler perfectly lined up and just draw that shoulder position in, and then I'm just going to double check. So that is 13 centimetres. So on the front, I need to draw this slightly lower just because of the shape of it and what happens when I close up this dart. So there's quite a lot to explain with that, and it's a lot to go into in this video, but I actually cover it in a lot of detail in my fitted bodice block tutorial if you want to get a bit more understanding of why I'm doing what I'm doing. So this measurement here was 3.9. Oops, did have it on the calculator just then. So 3.9, I'm going to add on 1.5 centimetres. So 5.4 is what I want to measure down from this original top line, the one coming from the back. And that is where my shoulder point is going to meet up. So I'm just drawing across here like this. And then I'm going to do exactly the same. And I need to go to this point here where I measured the dart, where it matched up. And that is going to be 13 centimetres to match the back. You need to make sure these are exactly the same measurement. So it goes to that point there. Just move my ruler to actually draw the line. It makes it a bit easier than drawing it to the end. And that's my front shoulder done. So this is a bit of an approximation on the shoulder slope, and everyone's shoulders are going to be very, very different. If you've got two shoulders that even match on your own body, then you are unusual, because most people have shoulders that are slightly different to each other, particularly if you're used to carrying a bag on one shoulder. But once this dart closes up, this shoulder slope will be more similar to this one. But this is something that's really easy to fix once you've got your sample made up. So all I need to do now is just draw in my armhole, and I'm just going to do this by eye. You can use a curve if you want to, but as I've been doing this for a long time, I just get quite used to drawing these shapes in. So I could give you an exact measurement that you need to meet from these points here, but it's going to be different for every single body shape. So all I would say is it just needs to look like a nice natural curve. What you don't want is any of the points, this one, or this one, going into a point or kind of jutting out. You just want one continuous smooth curve. So using a ruler or something like that that bends is a good way of making sure those are nice curves. If you've got something that would bend around the whole thing, then that would be even better. But that's the kind of shape you're going to end up with. And depending on whether you are curvy or more athletic, this shape is going to vary quite a bit. Everyone's a different size from here to here. We're all different widths. Everyone's body proportions are so different that everyone's block is going to look quite different. So don't be concerned if yours looks quite different to mine. Our bodies are all completely different. So that's all of that top bit done. I'm not putting the waist shaping in, but I have my positions ready. And then the last thing I want to do, if I slide this up like this, is I need to check my hip. Now I know my hips are very wide compared to my top half, so this is not going to be big enough for my hip. So I took a measurement, including ease. I just put the tape measure around nice and easy, and I want it to be 121 centimetres with the ease on my finished block. So I'm going to divide that by 4 because we want half of the front and half of the back. So 30.25 is what I need to measure from the front and from the back. So I'm just putting marks there. And we're going to have to use another bit of paper just to fill this in. But all I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a curve, and this is where a bendy ruler comes in really handy. So this curve now, if I turn it this way round, my side seam goes down to the waist and then it curves out to fit around my hips. And then if you're adding waist shaping in later on, you can always bring that in a bit more, but I don't need to for the block. And I'm just going to do exactly the same here as well. And you'll see that these curves are slightly different shapes because I've measured exactly the same at the bottom on the hip line, but this part here is different because I have more fullness in the front than the back at the bust, and that's what dictates this side seam. So you end up with side seams that are slightly different in shape. So let's zoom out a little bit and I'll turn it to the side so now that we can see the whole thing, just making sure it's all in shot. I think it is. So this is the entire block now for the coat. So the armhole, once you've got it on, if you make a sample with no seam allowance, you can see exactly where this is. But if you're planning on doing a sleeve, I would put the seam allowance on it and maybe just draw a line where the actual seam line is. So you want to make sure this is in a good position here. If it's too high, it's going to be uncomfortable and you're going to struggle to put it on over clothes. If it's too low, it's going to restrict arm movement. And the other thing with this armhole is this is what dictates the sleeve head. So make sure it's not too tight or you're going to really struggle to make a sleeve that fits in it, that's going to look good and is going to be comfortable. So I'm going to get all of this now cut out so I can make a sample up of this and make sure it fits. So before I cut it out, I need to just do something here where these overlap. So I'll show you really quickly. All I'm doing is I'm going to cut up one curve. It doesn't matter which way around you do this. And then just continue up a little bit there. And it's always good to keep little offcuts of paper because they come in very handy for doing things like this. All I need to do is stick this bit of paper under there. I'm just going to touch it in a couple of places for now. And then I'm just tracing off this line here. And then when I cut this out, oops, you'll see exactly what I'm doing. I'm just tracing that along the bottom as well. And now that's done, I can just fix that a little bit more securely, particularly at the top and bottom where the edges of that are. So I can cut this out now and you'll see exactly what I've done. And if your hip is going to be big enough without doing this, then you don't need to do this. But I'd say more women have bigger hips than busts than the other way around. So this is going to be quite a common adjustment. So that now adds that fullness in for the hip. Hopefully that makes sense. So I can now just get the rest of this cut out and I can make a sample for it. So that's everything now cut out and I'm ready to make a sample of this. So this is all now cut out. It's hard to get it all in shot, but basically for my front, I've cut 2 pieces and then I put a seam allowance at the front so I can pin it together, and I have cut a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance all around it other than the neck opening and the bottom because I want to see exactly where that neck opening sits. I just need to know that this fits to the hip. I don't need anything beyond that, so I've just cut it to there. And then for the back I have cut it on the fold and the rest is exactly the same. And now these notch marks here are because I'm going to try fitting this with a sleeve. These notches line up with that sleeve. So this is why I've cut the seam allowance on the armhole so I can put the sleeve on, because I think if I'm going to be making a coat with sleeves, then I really want to be fitting it with sleeves to see how it works. If you are only planning on making sleeveless gilets, things like that, then you can just try this without a seam allowance on the armhole and just see where that fits like that. Or if you want to make sure the body of your block is absolutely perfect before drafting the sleeve, then you could maybe leave off this seam allowance, but it just means that you're going to have to remake the sample to put your sleeve in. So I would just suggest cutting the seam allowance, and if you're trying it on initially without the sleeve, just draw a line around where the pattern is before you take the paper off, and then you can see on your body exactly where that goes. So I'm just going to get this sewn up now. All I need to do is just sew up this dart to the end point there, and then I just need to do my side seams and my shoulder seams to put this together. If you need any help at all in sewing this up, then there is a link in the description to my tutorial that shows you basically how to use your patterns, how to sew them up. But I'm sure if you are undertaking the project of making a coat, then you are quite familiar with sewing things up. So I'm going to get it sewn up and then we can have a look at how this fits with my sleeve on it too. So you obviously have already seen it, but let's talk now about the fit. you are making this obviously to get it to fit perfectly so that you don't have to do loads of fittings when you come to make your coats. So I'm just going to run through the basics that you need to look at. I do have a separate video as well it's for bodice block adjustments, but it's going to be exactly the same principle for this that you can look on. But let's just go through the things that you really need to look at with this sample. First thing is, does it fit around you? Do you need to add any more ease in? Do you need to bring it in? Just check the general fit around the bust and around the hip and make any adjustments on your pattern that you need to do. It is quite straightforward where your seams are just making them a bit wider or a bit narrower, and you can do those adjustments on the side seam here. And then check that all the positions are in the right place vertically. So you don't have a waist position on here, but you can just draw that on when you're making your block if you want to double check that's in the right place in case you're adding waist shaping at any point. Check where the hip is. Mine is sitting slightly lower than what I'd planned, so I'd obviously measured my waist to hip a little bit low, but it fits well around here, so I just need to take a little bit off the bottom to show that hip line. And then the bust point. So I feel like my dart is a little bit high. It looks all right if my dart was positioned here, but if I was having a dart coming from the side for this shaping and it pointed as high as this, I think it would be a little bit high. So I'm just going to lower that dart point a little bit. So just have a look on yours, and if you look from the side, you're going to see much clearer. And you could also draw a line, as I said with the waist, you could draw a line here as well, just to make sure you can see if it's in the right position for that. So then the more trickier bits we need to look at. Make sure your neck fits well and your shoulder slope. You kind of need to look at this all in one go. So you want your neck, if I just it's not staying in place brilliantly, it's such a lightweight fabric, but you want it to fit snug around the back, on your shoulder. Now I haven't adjusted this at all. This is literally exactly as I drafted it up. So when I was talking about the shoulder slope and I said it is a little bit of an approximation doing that calculation, you can see that actually now I've put it on, the shoulder slope is perfect. So it does work really well. But if it's not right, and what I would advise to do is maybe, if it isn't right, just unpick the top of the sleeve if you already put it on. If you haven't put a sleeve on, then you obviously don't need to worry about that. I would just unpick the shoulder seam and then pin it where you think it needs to go. And then if I just grab my pattern, where you change it on your pattern, if you've pinned it with a slightly smaller seam allowance, then you just need to extend your pattern up. If you've pinned it a little bit tighter, you need to trim off your pattern. But just make sure you get that shoulder slope absolutely perfect, and that could also influence how the neck fits. You want that neck to be perfect. If your shoulder slope fits really well, but your neck is still gaping a little bit, you might need to just play around with how wide the neck is, or the neck drop. Now the neck drop is a pretty kind of standard one. I can't see in a mirror, so I don't know if I'm showing this very well, but the neck drop is pretty standard. It's most likely going to be the width. So if you've got a bit of gaping at the back here, you might want to just bring that neck width in a little bit, and then what you're going to need to do, because that will make your shoulder line a little bit bigger, let's just look at this again. If you are bringing your neck in to make it less wide, to get rid of any of the gape, it's going to make your shoulder very slightly longer. Now with wool fabrics, if you're planning on making a wool coat, which is what this is designed for, all those kind of fabrics, you can ease it on to a point, but you don't want to be easing on too much. So if you're just talking a couple of millimeters, that's going to be fine. But if you're adding, say, 0.5 centimetre or something to the length of your shoulder to make your neck smaller, you're either going to have to change it as well on your front, but that might be a problem, or you're going to have to adapt it on this side. What you need to do is, once you've got the neck right, you need to look at both of these shoulder pieces together and just make sure that they still line up. Everything still needs to match. And then obviously you need to think about that armhole, and that's why I wanted to show this with a sleeve, because when it hasn't got a sleeve on it, it's kind of hard to visualize how it's going to be. You want to make sure that it's not too low. If your armhole is too low, it's going to restrict your movement there, or it's just going to feel a bit weird. If it's too high, you're going to struggle to get it on over your clothes and it's going to feel really bad. So check how low your armhole is, and you might need to just adjust that. And literally all you need to do, if you need to raise it or lower it, is just adjust this bit here, and then obviously do the same on the other piece so it matches up. And if you've already drafted your sleeve, when you're doing this stage, you're going to need to adjust your sleeve accordingly. So that is the bottom of the armhole. We need to look at the top as well. You want to just make sure that where your sleeve joins onto this, that it's in the right position. If it's too high, if it's up here somewhere and you don't want it looking like that, you just need to make your shoulder wider. And then vice versa, if you feel like this seam here is too low down and you don't want to drop shoulder, you want it to kind of sit here, then you just need to make it a bit shorter. But you can just play around with that, just pin it on yourself and then take it off, and you can have a good look at what you've pinned and do the adjustments. And you just want to make sure the position going across is in the right place. So if this position here is too far over here, if I just pull that over like that, it's not going to feel great when you put your sleeve on it. If that's sitting too far out, then it's just going to look odd and it's not going to feel very good. So just double check the position of all of that. And that really is just a case of looking at your pattern. You could even just draw on this with a pencil and then just translating it onto your pattern for your adjustments. So you can either do as I've done and do the sleeve and then fit it all in one go and then adjust both, or just get the body part done and do your sleeve later once you've got this fitting correctly. I think a lot of that boils down to whether you've done this kind of thing before or you're completely new to it. But I hope I've covered all of the fit issues that you might need to look at. If I haven't, as I said, there is a link to my bodice fitting tutorial, which will be all the same kind of adjustments to this, where I go into a little bit more detail and I show you on the pattern on the table as well what I'm doing. So I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you are looking forward to drafting your own block so you can make your own coat. I love making coats because partly for me, I've got really narrow shoulders, I'm really short, I've got wide hips. I can't just go and buy a coat. If I try a coat on in a shop, it never ever fits. If I've got a really short cropped one, maybe, but other than that, the sleeves are too long, the shoulders are too wide, everything is completely wrong. I've been making my own coats literally for years, and it's the only way for me I can get them that actually fit properly, and I'm really fussy about my fit. So I hope you are looking forward to making your own coat and getting exactly what you want that fits really, really well. If I have missed anything or if anything's not clear, do please ask in the comments. I always get back to everyone. If you've got any suggestions on any coat themed tutorials that you would like me to do, then do please ask. Also, as I said, the two-piece sleeve tutorial is coming in the next few days. If I haven't posted it yet, you're too early, but make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss that one. And check out my other tutorials. I've got lots of pattern cutting tutorials now and all sorts of sewing tutorials. And finally, thank you very much to Yvonne, who was my first supporter on buymeacoffee.com, which I've put a link to. If you want to help me grow my channel and want to support me in any other ways other than viewing, then take a look.